Hello. Let's see here. I'm going to today. Hello. Come on in. I am Kathy Freeman with Kathy Freeman Art. I am super glad to be here today. I have been here for the last few days at 11 o'clock, and I will do this until Friday. So today is Thursday, so I'll do one more tomorrow. And I might just get peppy and do it again on Saturday. But the whole purpose of doing this is basically because my membership is opened and I want to give an opportunity to get to know you and to have you get to know me and to invite you into joining in with my art sisters. Love working with these ladies, and I want to invite you to be a part of it too. So I'm giving you some of the tips in that we do. We're kind of having a little mixed media um, party happening here, and I hope you've been watching and keeping up with it. Today, I wanted to focus on the tip of creating texture into our work. And we do it most of the time, we do it when we are with color and different shapes in that from the papers that we use. But I want to um, encourage the whole idea of adding tactile texture. And so something I'm going to show here, let me see what happens if I enlarge me a little bit. There we go. um, this little piece of work here, the texture that is added, and it's a little challenging to see, but I'll get closer. You can see down at the bottom. Can you see? What is that? What do you think that is? I was just getting ready to do this project one time, and I thought to myself, I want something that looks kind of rocky. I want something where this is like out in the forest and it's a little bit rocky, and these little mushrooms are popping up, and the bird is singing, and the sun is shining. And then you've got your wildflowers growing in that. And I wanted something that could represent this, that was actually something you could feel and touch. And I came up with the idea of using eggshells. That's not a brand new idea. I know many people have used that before, but look how wonderful it created this texture. And then when I went back in and I used paints, or I used different things, it really accentuated it and created it. Go ahead and say hello. I've got someone on here. I can tell you're here. Just pop your name in here, just your first name, if you will, and tell me where you're from, or at least just pop your first name in here so I have an idea of who I am talking to. It is always great to have you. And if you're on one of this streaming, I know I'm streaming into several different pages. If you are one of the pages that doesn't have it, then I understand. Sorry about that. I think that would only be like YouTube. I know I'm streaming in YouTube. Possibly that doesn't have one. Hello, someone else is here. Go ahead and say hello and let me know where you're from. And it doesn't always put in your name. I'm going through a program called StreamYard, and it doesn't always put in your name. And for my new person that just popped in and said hello, we were just talking about texture and creating tactile texture in our artwork, in our mixed media. Something that speaks to the people, that says, reach out, touch me. When you put this, hi, Loretta, thank you from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Oh my goodness. I'd love to go see Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's like there's songs written about it, movies. Just love to see that place. So welcome, and I'm glad you're here. And Inverness, Florida. I don't know where that one is at, actually, myself, but let me turn that down so you don't hear that noise coming on. We're talking about tactile mixed media, adding things, and this is eggshells, and being able to put something on that people, when you turn it to the side, when I look at it from the side, if something's hanging, it's like, oh my goodness, what is that? It makes you want to go up and touch it. It makes you want to really engage yourself in the piece of work. And that's what's fun about art. It's nice to look at something. We can always go, buy a card or whatever, buy a print and put it up there. But when you can add that third element to it, which is the actual tactile piece where you're touching something and you can become a part of it. That's what pulls people in. And I think that's fun. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a video that I created for my membership, because we have someone that one of the sisters was asking me, one of the ladies was asking me, she says, I'm just having a really hard time with trees. I can't seem to get trees down. And so I created this little short video to help her. And I thought this would be a great thing to share and to put out there for others, that not necessarily that you're having a hard time with trees at all, but just maybe there's something new that you'll learn. And one thing that I do when I'm using a lot of times with trees is to create that texture that's in it so that it looks like it's really wood, is I'll use modeling paste. Whoops, there we go. I'm not advertising this particular brand, but modeling paste, this is kind of gives you an idea of what it looks like so that you can find it. Sorry, it's always a little challenging when you're trying to do it this way. Anyway, that's it. That's what we're using. Have you ever, Loretta, have you ever used modeling paste yourself? Give me a comment. Let me know. All right, let's go ahead and start with this. And any comments, any questions you have, like I said, post it in the comments. And even though the video is going, I am right here. I'll be answering and helping out with anything that you might need help with. Let me go to the big screen. We'll start this up. She was having struggles with creating a tree on a project that we had. And so I thought, let's talk trees. I don't really consider myself a tree expert, but I love making trees. So I love to share the passion that I have for creating them with you. And maybe you'll pick up a few tips here and there as we go along. This gives you a couple of examples. If you look at my video I'm showing, or the camera that's showing you down on my table here, this is a project that I did in a journal page. And I love the texture that this created on the page because I use modeling paste. So I'm going to do a sample of that in a few minutes so you can see how I went about doing that. Here's another project. This is actually a project that we're going to have in the membership. So those of you that are in my membership, you Art Sisters, you're going to have this in the library so that you can do that. That's using modeling paste. And that's the same project, but I wanted to show you the difference in color. So when we talk color here in a second, I'll pull those back out. Now this one is just paper. It's cut paper that's been collaged on to create that tree. And this one is primarily drawn on. I've added just a teeny bit of the modeling paste right here, because I don't know why I just cannot get away from using that texture. I love what it creates, but it's watercolored on. So that kind of gives you a few examples. Let's talk now about drawing a tree. And I think where this little artist was, where she was having troubles, this challenge is basically the branches looked about the same size as the trunk. So let's talk about drawing a trunk and drawing the branches. I remember in school, we would do kind of this very slight hourglass shape, like so. And I think I'm going to need to change to a marker so you can see this on camera. Pencil's not going to be very easy. All right, the lines of the tree, and that's not a great marker. Oh, that's okay. Get there. See if this is a little better. Oh, so much better. All right, the hourglass kind of shape of a tree as we draw. Trees are typically have a little bit of shape to them rather than just straight lines. When you branch off with it, the whole goal is to take your branch, and as you move outward, it starts thicker and goes thin. And I believe where she was having problems is that line stayed the same width all the way across. And so as you're working with your trees, think about thicker at the bottom and going thinner towards the top. And of course, they look thinner because of the distance that we see them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One thing else too is that when I'm usually shading a tree, I'll come into these areas and I'll add a little more shading to that area to emphasize that. And of course, on the bottom of the branch, I'll add a little shading to it too, just a little bit to go down. Now, the other thing that, and this is personal preference, okay, is a tree to me is a living thing that has had many years of what I consider wisdom and knowledge. You think about the things that a tree, all the stuff that goes around it, that happens on around it, and the birds and the animals that use the tree. So I never like to just make a tree totally straight lines. I think that adding a little bit of shape to that trunk makes for more interest in the tree than having just straight lines. But it depends on the piece and what you're trying to create. The same thing with the branches. When you're creating the branches, giving them just a little bit of a wave to that, maybe even stuttering. Is that the word to use? Does that make sense? But if you're trying to draw it, kind of stutter and lift your pen in that and add some of that. Let me put that a little closer and see if that pops up. But that adds a texture to it and a difference of line, which adds interest to the tree. Going back up now, since I have a little hole there, that makes a great spot to come off of there and to add another little branch going out. And that's the thing with trees. It's just a series of, I always draw them first with a pencil. That way I can go back and erase where, when I add another branch, then I can go back and erase where those two meet right there. So that kind of gives an answer to her question, I hope, is that the trunk is always going to be larger than your branches. Rarely do you see, you may see some pretty large branches on a very old tree, but it still gravitates or narrows as it goes up the tree limb. Never stays exactly the same. The lines never stay parallel. Okay, now, and if you're on here, hi, Joni, how are you? Anybody that is on here, if you have questions, please type them in and let's chat for a minute and see if I can answer them or anything that might pop up. I've got this right here, some watercolor paper, and I thought, let's just play for a minute. So I'm going to use my pencil. And draw on here a tree. The other thing that I tend to do too is, if you noticed when I drew this, if I can get a little closer so you see it, this line, I don't make them exactly the same. This line, the branches, it goes up and it starts to widen at the top. The branch took off up here, but as I came along here, I started that branching off a lot earlier. It's such a gradual change you don't notice, but that variety that it's not identical gives it a little more, I think, realistic look to it. Hi. Hello, how are you, Melissa? How do you use mediums on watercolor paper? What mediums are you particularly talking about? Are you talking about acrylic paints? Are you talking about matte medium? What mediums are you referring to, Melissa? Give me a little more specific and see if I can answer that question for you. I like to use watercolor paper for pretty much all of my projects because of the weight that it gives to me. And so whether I'm doing these right here is watercolor paper, and this has on here the modeling paste and acrylic paint. So I simply use it just because it's a lot, has more density to it than the mixed media. If you have a mixed media pad, though, that will work. But I would suggest that you cover over it with some gesso first. or put a layer of matte medium or something on it to give it a little bit more strength and stability to it. The other reason I like to use watercolor paper is because I love to use watercolor and intermingle all of it. And here you go. I meant the modeling paste. Thank you. You answered. Okay, awesome. I'll show you. We'll actually do one on this real quick, and you can see that. Okay, glad I answered. Thank you for putting that in there. Okay, so I'll come up here, and I usually think about, okay, I'm not going to go dead center. You can, no big deal, but I'm going to start right here. A little bit of distance between the two, and then just start moving towards that other line. And I'm going to move back and forth and create that teeny bit of like a little knot hole or something. I don't know really what it is, but see, it just adds a little variety and interest to it. Now this one can head off and go that direction, which it will, but then I'm going to take it off up here, like another little branches. Then we'll take off here and go up this way and come back. And that actually would, I want to keep it pretty close. I don't want to come that far down. Okay, so that starts that. Now let's jump into the modeling paste. I do love using that. I think the first time I ever used it was last year. I was creating some leaves for an event that I was hosting, and they were fall leaves. And it was just a really neat way to quickly create that texture on them. Okay, all I do is I take the modeling paste, and I'm going to start upside down so I can move it. You doesn't have to, but think about your spreading. Have you ever frosted a cake? Think about frosting a cake. You want just enough pressure on there that you can get a nice light layer. You don't want it too thick, but if it's so thin, then it dries too quickly and you can't really get what you need to do next, the next step in. You can leave areas. Can you see that? Can you see how I've left areas? And I also leave, sometimes I'll leave these little knobby areas that are created. I never try when I'm doing anything. Obviously, I'm using this for texture. So my goal is not to make it ultra smooth. All right, so I go ahead and I let the product create and do what it does best, and that is create that texture. So here we go up like so. And then just put it on. I'm going to put a little bit on this one. This direction. You see what I'm doing? Any questions so far? If you go outside the line, it's easy. You just pop it off. Just scrape it off. Wipe it down. And look, I think that I get really excited about this. I'm sorry, it's a little ridiculous, but it creates such wonderful texture right there. And you don't have to worry about drawing that in. And that variety, that texture adds interest to your piece. All right. The more you can get a person to stop and look and question and say, oh, how did they do that? How did they make that? The better, you know, that's just really what art's all about, is get people to think and question. Always put your lid back on quickly. Don't leave it off because it dries out. And then I would get this in water myself too, because it dries on that. So if I'm doing something with maybe a stencil and I've got modeling paste, then I will have a little tub of some sort off to the side filled with water so that I can pop it in there. And then I don't have to worry about stopping what I'm doing to go do that. Okay, now the next step I like to do with the trees, let me grab this and wipe that off, is to start creating those lines. So I take the edge of my palette knife, and I can feel that some of this has already started to dry a little bit, which isn't a problem, but that's why you just keep moving with it. And these lines are never well, I don't want to say never because I'm not a tree expert, but I don't think that they're exactly straight. So they'll go back and forth a little bit. Can you see that? See how those lines, which takes a lot of pressure off of us artists of trying to make these perfect lines, doesn't it? Sometimes we get working at something, we get it in our mind and we want it to look just so, and it's like, it can be a little frustrating. All right. There we go. Yes, I do get excited. Thank you, Melissa. I'd love to see your paintings. Okay, so there we go. Now let's dry that. You do want to get it as dry as possible. All right, do the little dry test. If you've got a thick area, it's going to take a little longer for that to actually dry out. So let it dry. Because if you do hit it with water, I've used watercolor on this before, and it works great. But if you put too much or sit there and try to work with it for too long, then it starts to disintegrate and dissolve some of this. So I know. I'm so sorry about that. It did. It just decided to just kick off. But I'm back. So let's keep going. I am at the part now. I had dried it and I was going to start watercoloring it. So I grabbed my brush, and the last thing I was saying before it went dead was I start with the lightest color first. I typically do. The lightest brown. And I love to use watercolor at this particular point, and the watercolor works great across the product modeling paste. As you can see, when I do it, I'm not super careful. What I mean is I want the variety, the changes happening here. So I just flop it on there. Flop it, that's not the right term, but paint it on. And I'm not trying to do it very loosely. Like so. All right, the next thing I do is I go towards a darker color, a darker brown actually, and I skip around and add that. Maybe emphasizing it in a certain area. Not covering, I don't want to cover everything exactly, the same. I want some areas to be, and create that the texture in that by the color. I think the other thing that happened is I remember talking with the other artist is sometimes, and this happens to me a lot too, is I can get working and not be thinking about I'll be thinking about something else basically, and I'm not really paying attention, and I'll end up putting about the same amount. So if you've got the same amount, and what do I mean by that? The same amount of the two different colors, then they're just fighting off of each other. They're not really complementing each other. All right, can you see what I've got happening there? Just the changing of the colors in that, and how it creates texture on its own. So if you don't have modeling paste, what you just saw me do with the watercolor will create texture for you also. You can do the same thing with acrylics. Now, this is personal preference. You may not like it, but I will usually go towards a dark gray, or maybe even a turquoise if I'm just feeling like it. And I'll add little bits of that. I tend to follow along where the lines are, though. So where those lines that I, carved out with my modeling paste, I will come back with my brush and follow those lines. And it will go down into those little crevices. And you're just adding a shadow is what you're doing, and creating a little more emphasis on those. Now, what you're seeing happening here is it's getting too wet right there, and it's starting to lift it all up. So what I need to do is also getting into my watercolor. So I need to get that cleared out. I'm going to grab my dryer. You just simply stop, get your dryer. And dry it. Once you've got it dried, then you can come back. And I'm going to add a little turquoise. Because it just works so nicely with the brown. Just skipping around, brushing, and letting it blend. And that's really it. Let it kind of dry some more if you want. Let's go back to the dark here. We can add that, and I think that just wants to have some more brown on top of it. There we go. And that definitely adds a lot of texture right there to your tree. All right, that's how you create that tree trunk. Let's come back. Maybe we've got a little moss growing on our tree. So I'm going to take some of the olive green. And this is really subtle. You're not able to see it that much on camera. So I'm adding that in there. So to kind of summarize it, make sure that when you're creating your tree, that it's a gradual narrowing as it goes upward, starting with the trunk. And always, I usually see, I don't know if this really is the truth or if it's just in my mind, but I always think of the tree because of the roots getting wider down at the bottom. And then I always narrow mine in a little bit here in the center, kind of like a waistline. And then we come back out and start forming the branches. The branches on my trees are never the same size as the trunk. Now, this particular branch is taken off. So this is going to be, if it was a very large tree, actually, the branches would spread out this way because so they could narrow. There. Gotta turn that mic back on. All right, I hope you picked up some tips from that and were able to, I know that Loretta on here, she mentions that she uses Dimension, and she also uses a lots of different things too to make her texture on the tree, and, she uses stencils. I came across, and let me tell you this really quick, I don't didn't bring it here for you to see, but in the I'm gonna put this up here, that's easier for me. Perfect. If you go into the baking department in your hobby store, whatever, your craft store, if you go into that, you'll find that in there they have this little stamp that they use for cakes. And on that, I found one, and they use it to wrap around the cake, and it's beautiful wood texture, beautiful wood texture. And of course the baker would use that to put on the frosting to create that treat. So if maybe doing what I just did isn't comfortable for you, or you're brand new to it, then getting something like that, to press down on your modeling paste, your dimensional paste, whatever, putting that down on there would is works also really well. The other thing too is, as Loretta mentioned, is to use stencils. And I haven't purchased, because I'm comfortable in doing that, creating those lines and that. I'll use my palette knife quite a bit. I'll use a metal one, and I'll use a very thin tipped one, and I'll just turn that onto the angle like so, and use it to go down and create those kind of wavy little bit of a line, just like a tree trunk has. The tree has that little texture that goes down it. Uh, Obviously, any kind of a pointed tool works beautifully. You can just grab an old dead pen or a pencil and use that. Anything that will create that line for you. So there's so many things you can get a hold of nowadays to create these trees. But the point is if you're not using modeling paste or dimensional or anything to add some texture to it, I want to give you that challenge. Step out and start using some of that and just try it. I hadn't used last year was probably the first time I used modeling paste, and now I seem to put it in a lot of my work. I love the texture that it creates. I mentioned before as we first started that, yay, my doors are wide open for my membership, and I am welcoming people in until next Monday. So we've got a few more days left: Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I won't be on here Sunday. I take Sundays off. I don't work on Sundays for this, but I'll be back on during this next few days. But if you join in, this is the project that we will be doing coming up next week, next Wednesday. So please go ahead and sign up now. Get your supplies and everything. This is called Bird in the Window. And I did use some of the modeling paste on this to create that texture. And of course, just grab some of the wood and things that I have. So this is a fun project. Our library has many different ones. I don't do a lot of three dimensionals, but I thought that that would be just a fun switch, changey uppy thing to give the women an idea of something different to do. All right, you have a wonderful Thursday, and thank you so much for joining in with me. And you can find my information by going to kathyfreemanart.com, or type in on your computer myartsisters.com, and what will pop up is our campsite, our virtual campsite that we hang out at, and you can cruise around in there. And obviously, if you're not a member, you can't get past some of the locked doors, you might say. But there are some information I have in my Glamper, a free class in there that you can take, and I'm adding periodically some of the things. I'm going to be posting these videos in on the campsite, so you can be able to watch it again there. All right, have a beautiful day, and thank you so much for joining in, and I will be talking to you again soon. Keep